I was told early on, and I'll never forget this because I was so touched by it. They said, "You are not here to make money, Dianne. You are here as a public service. Journalism is a constitutionally protected right of a free democracy." That has ended. Now you are absolutely responsible for the clickbait, for the viewers' eyes. So are the newspaper reporters, by the way, to some extent. They are judged by how many people read their pieces. My son is a newspaper reporter. So it's a different world. It's very competitive, and there's no more speeches, I guess, about the nobility of us all, except within certain kinds of contexts. My motivation for my career and my whole life was simply to get out of town. I was raised in New Jersey in a big family, 5 kids. I was the oldest, and they were very noisy, and it was very New Jersey. And I had my dreams, especially as a teenager, of exotic international intrigue. And I thought, how can I ever do that? Well, I had a chance to some extent because I applied for and got a AFS, American Field Service scholarship as a exchange student when I was a junior in high school. And it was to Switzerland, and I lived with a French-speaking family, which was pretty exotic. Also, their food was a lot better than the stuff at home. That led to my majoring in French in college and organizing the ability to go into the Peace Corps as soon as I graduated from college. So this was a whole plan of getting out of town again. I went into the Peace Corps, and I was sent to Micronesia, which is in the Western Pacific, and spoke Chamorro, which is absolutely no help at all through the rest of my life, but never mind, I got good at it. Taught ESL and taught high school drama as well. And worked in the radio station. They had a radio station. And on the way home, after 2 years and 2 months, I took the long way home through Asia and the Middle East and Europe, and finally arrived triumphant back in New Jersey with all the kids. They were still there, still making a lot of noise. It was a fun household, but I thought, I have to get back out there. So I took off again. This time I managed to get myself through a series of events to UCLA for graduate work. And one of my courses was in communications, and it took place in the Pacifica radio station called KPFK, which is still there in LA, with a legendary professor called Larry Moss, who was very cool. And it was the 70s. It was hippie time. We had to feed the cats that lived in the building with us first before we could sit in class. And after we got going, and one day somebody came in and said, would any of you like to volunteer to come at 5 in the morning and open the place with the engineer and rip and read? I said, I would. So I did that for a bit, and the class ended, and I was still going 5 in the morning to KPFK. And one day I heard of a radio job that was actually paying. And so I ran over there. It was in LA, across the street from the art museum, and it was KMET, KMET, which was a very big, popular rock and roll station, hard metal. And I went in there and applied, and they said, this is for 10 o'clock to 1 o'clock in the morning, 10 o'clock at night. And I said, I'll do it, whatever. And I realized for the first time, and it had occurred to me, of course, before this, that people were looking for their very token female voice on the air. And it was just thought of to be the cool thing to have diversity, not too terribly diverse. But there I was with the chance to have at it and do, I guess, what they wanted. The only thing is they told me no matter what's happening in the world, and it was a very busy news time with Nixon and Watergate and so on. They said, you have to lead with the Rolling Stones schedule wherever they are in the world. I said, I can handle this, I'll be fine. So I led with the schedule, and we tried to get to the real news at times. But again, it led to somebody hearing me on the air and having an idea that maybe I could be helpful to them. Turned out to be Channel 4, and they were up for license renewal. Very big station, second biggest market in the country, and it was television. And I got a call saying, do you want to go and come and try out to be a news writer? And I thought, how bizarre. I don't know. anything about TV. That's what I told them. They said, come and try. I came in, this would never happen today, of course. I came in and I learned that they had 19 male news writers. But the government said to them, you need some diversity, and to get your license renewed, what about it? Well, here I was, a token again. And it was terrifying to me. I had no experience writing to picture, as they say in TV. And I sat down, and the newsroom was huge, and there were sets of 4 desks for each show, 4 writers for the morning, 4 writers the afternoon show, and evening, and so on. And 2 of them were occupied when I walked in, which was morning and afternoon. And they were therefore these 8 typewriters going strong. They were this big, and they had 3-inch keys. That's how high the keys were. People pounded, they were electric, but they were pounding, and it was a hurricane in there. And I thought, what on earth? And it was because we were typing script and intros and writing to video, which was called only film then. And the letters had to be so big because they would take them to the studio and roll it through a teleprompter, and then the anchor would read it across the room far away. And this was how they could understand what was to be in the script. But we had to be upstairs and doing these things on giant letters. Can you imagine, if you'd never even worked as a typewriter, how you could sit there and think of what somebody else should be reading for your words? After 3 months, I was told, we will try you out for 3 months. I went to the executive producer and I said, thank you so much. This has been an extraordinary adventure, and I really learned a lot. But I was told that 3 months was it, and thank you, goodbye. And he said, what are you talking about? And I said, well, that was my trial period. He said, Dianne, sit down and write. And that was the beginning of my career. I went back to work, and there I was. So this finally led upstairs at this Burbank office for KNBC was the network, NBC Network News. They covered the Western states and beyond. I heard after a time as a writer downstairs that they had a field producer job open up there. And I knew that meant somebody who did research. And then when you went out in the field with the crew, you did the technical stuff to try to get it fed at local stations, wherever you were. And I ran up there and pleaded. I said, take me away. And the reason is I wanted to get out of town again, out of the country. And I knew eventually that maybe I could bargain my way out of California and the Western states even. And that was true. I did. I was sent, meanwhile, to Texas for several months. I was sent to the South, and I was finally made a correspondent and sent to New York and then London. And at long last, I had my wish to be overseas and working and even covering news conferences in French. So there I was. When I did walk into that newsroom and see all these people at all these desks, all of them men, I was thinking, how am I going to be treated? Well, as it turns out, just think of yourself when you see somebody who's scared and sitting in the corner. You're not going to attack her. You're going to try to feel sorry for her, or you do feel sorry for her. People were very nice to me. They really were. And these guys stepped up and they taught me. They were kind, but mainly what I got off on was the humor in newsrooms. Unfortunately, now there's a whole lot of remote reporting. People just don't have that newsroom collegiality anymore. And it's really sad because it kept us constantly laughing. All we did was one-up each other. Once they saw that I could give back and, laugh with them and be as loose about it all as they were more comfortable themselves. So that was one example of a very relaxing part of it. But the rest of it was terrifying. So inexperienced and so scared always. You were so public, and God knows when I went on the air, I was really public. And who are we fooling? It was the imposter syndrome big time. It all sounds so easy. I had to grow, as we all did, all the women in those days had to grow shells of protection, not just because of all the female things people go through. And P.S., I really experienced very little of it. No one tried to, as far as I know, sexually harass me or certainly assault me or anything. I just mean for being young and for being green. People in newsrooms, any journalism, even now or anytime, see hardship, they see pain, they see a lot of pain. Unfortunately, if it bleeds, it leads is so true still. And therefore, you have to go after the victim. You have to question them. You have to witness it. You have to run in when the accident is fresh or the person is in mourning. And so there is a whole lot of reason to be down and out and depressed. And yet people who are, especially writers, they're often very clever and very dry humor. And I spent a lot of time in England, as I said, and therefore I was really amused there. Those people are funny. The Brits are really funny. And they just know how to laugh. And I think that shows up in maybe in a medical environment. Perhaps they have the same thing. I don't know. But that's one of the reasons that I love journalism, because of the people. They were very funny people. Women have hugely progressed. They're everywhere. And it just amuses me when people say, oh, we're trying to empower women. Frankly, there's nobody more empowered to me in many fields now than a women. And as a mother of a son, I'm always saying, well, maybe we should worry about the little boys too, somewhere along the. But I think that women just were finally given permission and their paths greased for getting in there, and they famously plowed, and this is old news now, it's back in the 80s even, that they were applying to law schools and medical schools in big numbers now. We just needed the permission. That said, old judgment continues, and people are even more judging of each other because of the internet now. We all had some extraordinary differences in our careers, because 3 years into mine came videotape. Well, we never were able to feed videotape before. We had electronic journalism, it was called ENG. And we couldn't edit. Anyway, there were no cell phones. Now you can feed from your cell phone and make it your message. And before it was faxing, it was telexes, it was pay phones, and it was film. So these were archaic techniques that we had to learn at the time. And to have the changes come along during the years that I was involved closely was a constant re-education. The embassy was robbed of people. They were taken by the Iranians and out of the American embassy and confined for 444 days. Ted Koppel did the ABC show at night to talk about them every single night. And it was an enormous, huge story around the world. But I did not cover that because we weren't allowed to go from London to Tehran. We were kept out of Tehran. The Western press was not allowed in. So we just waited like the rest of the world. However, I was lucky enough to be in Algeria the night that they were released. And an airplane came and landed, and there were literally bleachers to accommodate the Western press again. Cameras from here to the end of the world. And it was 2 a.m, and we had waited for hours, and finally it landed. And I'll never forget this. They started to stream off, and everybody did the same thing as they came down. And so did we on our bleachers. We all put our arms up. There were only arms to see. Everybody wanted to just reach and greet them. And they were thrilled to be here. And there was no one yet to meet them because they were taken almost immediately to Wiesbaden, Germany, to the hospital and checked, and there the families were. And we chased them up there, and we were outside waiting there too. But that single moment in the bleak of the morning, early morning, 2:30 in the morning, with our arms up waving, it was a stunning moment. Well, the lesson is to be tough. I mean, first of all, you have to endure a lot. Again, judged constantly if you're on television. After I had the babies, I went into local news. And this is the end of I went 13 years here in Connecticut on television locally, doing editorials.
Hi, I'm Dianne Wildman here in the Norwalk television studio where we tape Cablevision editorials. They appear on Wednesdays and Fridays on Channel 12. Though we share our studio facilities with News 12 Connecticut, we're independent from the news network. The editorials reflect the opinions of our corporate editorial board.
I did not do news. I used the video from the newsroom, but I was an editorial and opinion writer reflecting the opinion of the management and so on. Used to do this. I don't think anybody does this anymore. That was enormously educational for me, because who can do op-ed pieces every other day of their life with any kind of confidence? And that was another blundering through. I really blundered through much of my career at every stand. And the reason is that I was so lucky to get so many new chances and so many new opportunities to learn. It was exhausting finally. I was very happy to finally pull away and have the kids. That was a break, as it turns out, because then I went right back to terror on the job. To me, everyone I see on television seems enormously confident. They don't need my advice. They really don't. I think that they got this down, and they have it down because they're on the internet. They know what the whole world is doing. We never knew that. We lived in boxes, and you weren't even allowed to peek out of your tent easily in those days. And if you did, you better find a phone booth to talk to somebody. So there is no way that you can compare our lives with the technical changes and the confidence building that has happened with especially women on the air now, because they are the norm. They really are. So they don't want my advice. I say go for it. And I think they are going for it. When you travel with people and you're always in hotels with them and you live with them, I mean, it's crazy. Are you going to eat with each other tonight? Are you going to say goodnight at a certain time? And it was all tricky because, again, I was the only woman around often in those days. Who did hit you up was anyone in lobbies that were local people. You know, the businessmen from Lebanon or whatever, they were always, wherever you were staying, somebody would come up and just assume you were a prostitute if you're sitting in the lobby having a drink. So you had to say hello, good night to a lot of people and get out of there. Leave the room. That was my motto. If you did this every single day for 10 years with very few breaks, I mean, it had almost no vacations. It was so routine that you had to watch it, consume it, write it, get out of there, go on to the next one and the next one, the next one. I led in that sense a very unsexy life because it was just crank it. The networks took very good care of us. We were often given first-class accommodations on first-class airplanes. We were often told, whatever it takes, go out there. If you're not, as I said, you're not having to worry about you're making money or wasting ours. If we don't use the piece, you're forgiven. That was another thing. So in that sense, it was a hamster wheel. I was sent out on everything. I was called the rabbit because I was new and young. And I never got off airplanes once I was overseas. And I had to finally take stock of my life, because what do? You're forever out there. Yes, you're grabbing a date here and there. I also felt very constrained because I couldn't ever have a social life. I couldn't make the foray into flirting with anybody or trying to pick some guy up in a hotel lobby where I always lived in hotels, because I would be judged, because we were that close to another world that just in theory ended. It didn't really end. It still isn't ended to some extent. Women are judged for whatever they're doing in that way. But I was so careful and therefore had, you know, the odd guys that I would see here and there, but it wasn't anything serious. And I was getting worried because I wanted a baby. And I was going in my late 30s and I thought, here I am. I'm just going to be out here, never, ever off an airplane. So I offered to resign and they said, we will give you a sabbatical instead. But I knew I'd be called up no matter what. So finally, I did have somebody waiting in New York eventually, and I went back to join him, and we did eventually get married. And we had a baby boy, my baby Toby, and also adopted a little girl from South Korea, who is now, they are both in their 30s, these children, and they have both with their respective partners given me a baby son. And so I am a grandmother now, and happily so.